Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, distinguished guests, esteemed speakers, partners, and participants from around the world. Thank you so much for joining us today. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to the Africa Critical Minerals and Energy Transition Dialogue, convened by the Africa Center for Critical Minerals and Energy Transition. Today happens to be our inaugural conversation, and I want to say that you are officially welcome. My name is Gifty Boatema Annan, Strategy and Partnership Lead for ACCET, and we're excited to have you all join us. We believe that today's conversation would actually provide a timely platform for policymakers, researchers, investors, to explore how Africa can maximize the benefits of its critical mineral wealth while advancing sustainable development and long-term energy security across the continent. I would quickly run you through how the program is going to be for today, and then we'll quickly invite our first speaker. Once again, my name is Gifty, and so this is the program outline for today. We're going to have a welcome address and institutional presentation from our Executive Director, Dr. Isaac Ankara, followed by two keynote presentations from our international advisory boards. And then we're going to move to our panel discussion and then open up for an interactive session where we have our participants engage our speakers directly through questions and answers. And then that will bring us to the close of today's dialogue. And so without wasting any more time, I would want to invite our Executive Director, Dr. Isaac Ankara, to take the stage. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Gifty. Let me share some few slides here. Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Gifty, for the kind introduction, and good morning to everyone who is joining us from different parts of Africa and also even beyond. On behalf of ACCET, I warmly welcome you to the Africa Critical Minerals and Energy Transition Dialogue 2026. Of course, this will be our first in series of dialogue we want to convene. And before, we begin the main discussion, I will briefly want to introduce ACCET, especially explain why ACCET was established and why we believe the conversation is really is even important. Okay. Now, sorry. So ACCET is at ACCET, the starting point is very simple. No. So we believe that there's a strong imperative for the world to transition to a sustainable energy future, right? And that mandate squarely places critical minerals at the forefront of policy discussions. Now, what is even more pronounced is the role of the African because of its potential and abundance of resources that we have now. And in that space, we've seen or we believe that African minerals should not only power the transition elsewhere. Minerals must contribute directly to the African own development. We should make sure that we are benefiting from this transition. It shouldn't be just an uplift. So that is what we mean when we say the African minerals and the African future. And this particular idea introduces us to a gap that we found in the discussions that has been going on for some time now. So we've observed, because while we feel this one is even important, the discussion have been very exclusive. We've seen where minerals and energy transition are being discussed in a mutually exclusive way. So we have mining policy sitting at one space, energy policy at another space, climate policy somewhere else, and individual policy yet in another institutions. Yet the issue deeply is connected. On the energy transition depends on minerals, And the minerals development also affects what the industry policy. It affects the environmental governance, it affects the communities, trade, and even the finance and the technology. Okay. So assets or ACET, as people call it, seeks to fill these gaps. That is the fragmented governance, the limited value capture, the external agenda setting and institutional void that we believe. So that basically forms the idea of, bringing up ACET to discuss all these things, particularly with the gaps that we have seen in it. Now, so in that space, we see that there are minerals ministries, there are energy think tanks, there are climate NGOs. What is missing is the African-led institution that connects all these strategically. So that's what I meant by the fact that most of this issue about critical minerals energy transition has been advanced in a distinct and what separate or exclusive way. So there's a need to connect this together because we can't separate critical minerals from the energy transition, especially within the recent times that we've seen this discussion going on. And especially it places Africa at the forefront because we have the potential and we don't have to repeat the disadvantage that has been on us where we extract the raw materials, but yet so we don't benefit from the extraction and we don't benefit from the transition. So that is something that ACET seeks to fill, bring the connection all together, and also advance the cause of critical minerals, particularly within the framework of energy transition. So briefly, just about ACET. In simple terms, ACET is a Pan-African policy, research, and convening institution that works at the intersection of critical minerals and energy transition. And our position is very simple, as I've already explained: policy strategy, research evidence, convening power, and global engagement. Their values, the mission, and even the vision. Awesome. So our vision is to be a sustainable, resilient Africa where critical minerals power exclusive development and just global transition. The mission is to position Africa as a rule shaper in the global critical minerals and energy governance through research, policy engagement, and strategic partnerships. Our values are also the sustainability, equity, justice, excellence, collaboration, and accountability. And we have 5 thematic areas that we actually focus. Of course, this can be amended as time goes on when the need be. But we are the critical minerals governance is part of our focus. Energy transition pathways is part of our focus. So not just only these 2. We also have financing the transition itself, which are more related into this critical minerals and energy transition pathways too. We have the technology and innovation and community and environmental justice. Okay. Some of our flagship initiatives, of course, so it's still a convening institution. So it's not just about webinars, it's not just about research, but some of initiatives also include the Critical Mineral Sustainable Index. And those of you who want to get the brief detail, you can go on our website. Time may not permit me to go into details with all these. So Critical Mineral Sustainable Index, that is CMSI, has something that is part of our initiatives that we'll be embarking on. We had African Energy Transition Forum, the AETF, the Mining Governance Fellowship, the MGF, the Research and Policy Briefs, and what African Global Dialogue platforms. Okay. Now, so why is it even important in the, for the world? Yes, they sit in Africa, but we strongly believe that it's very important for everyone who is, interested in the critical minerals and energy transition. We believe that ACCET can play an important role both within Africa and also internationally. Yeah. The goal is to strengthen the African voice in setting the rules that govern critical minerals and energy transition. So we also want ACCET to serve as a trusted platform where stakeholders can engage and discuss issues constructively. Of course, we also serve as a policy finance bridge where we connect policy ambitions with capital, de-risking, implementing paths with long-term institutional play. So these are the things that we strongly believe that it makes ACCET a matter or something or an organization which matters globally, not just in Africa. And today, our dialogue is basically going to focus on a theme from resource extraction to strategic positioning, the Africa global energy transition. And we hope that the discussion will be candid, practical, and forward-looking. Once again, welcome and thank you for joining us. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Isaac Anker. That pretty much gives us a wholesome picture of what ACCET actually is and what it stands for. I believe that all participants who are joining us for the first time now understand what we stand for. Now, quickly, we're going to move to our keynote presentations. Exactly, we're going to move to our keynote presentations, 10 minutes for each keynote speaker. And so permit me to do an introduction of our first keynote speaker, Dr. Clement Sefa Nyako, and permit me to read his profile, his brief profile. He actually happens to be part of our International Advisory Board members. So Dr. Sefa is a UKRI Future Leaders Fellow and lecturer in security development and leadership in Africa at King's College, London. An experienced international development practitioner, he has worked across Africa and the Asia Pacific on governance, natural resources, and social policy. His research focuses on critical minerals governance, environmental and social justice, leadership, security, and state-society relations. Through his fellowship on justice in critical minerals governance and energy transitions, he examines community experiences in mineral-rich regions and advances more equitable, participatory, and sustainable approaches to natural resource governance. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome virtually our first keynote speaker for today, Dr. Clement Sefa Nyako.
Okay, yeah, started start now. Can you see my screen, please? Yes, and thanks so much for the very, very kind introduction there, Rita. I really, I really appreciate in terms. My screen is messing up with me now, so I'm not sure.
Oh, we can see it.
You can see my screen. Okay, that's fine. I can't see anyone, but it's fine. So in case anyone raises the hand and I need to make any point, just please let me know.
That's fine.
All right. So I guess critical minerals, and I mean the initiative from ACCET is fantastic because it puts us in a very good position in terms of where we are in Africa and how critical minerals play a part. But I guess my talk now is moving into questions of supply chains of the critical minerals that are important for the energy transitions that ACCET is championing. And I'm glad to be part of that as an international advisor as well. But again, I straddle between multiple spaces, and one of my roles is to research critical minerals and energy transitions in Africa, but across the world in Chile and Australia as well. But I'm based in London at King's College London. Now, this talk is going to focus on that the supply chains and the strategies that are required to ensure that there's sustainability in those supply chains, and that's always going to be a challenge. Because of the finite nature of the minerals needed for the energy transitions. And I don't think it's difficult to understand why critical minerals are needed for the energy transitions, partly because almost every renewable technology that we need now, and obviously from the Paris Agreement, there's a global desire to transition to more sustainable forms of energy, from fossil to EVs, to solar systems, to panels, and that's pretty much no-brainer. But what really is the issue is that a key part of that supply chain for those energy transitions is from critical minerals like lithium, cobalt, because the renewable energy systems, as you know, function and can only be possible through those minerals that provide the kind of qualities you need for renewable energy systems to function. But because they are finite and Western countries don't always have these minerals mined in their countries, there is this supply chain vulnerability assessment that every country makes. So countries like the UK, Australia, US, the EU as a region, are always thinking how to have access to these minerals. And so often there's this talk about having geopolitical alignment. So if China is not our friend, then maybe we should be wary of China and how that they could use the dominance of those minerals to sabotage Western economies. And rightly so, because if you see the way China, for instance, as a key example, dominates almost every mineral landscape. You think about, rare earth minerals, which, almost about 95% of all processing of rare earth minerals happens in China. They also have those minerals in abundance in terms of mining. Even though cobalt, for instance, is mined in DRC in abundance, about 70% of it. The Democratic Republic of Congo, which is Africa, about 80% of all global supplies. In fact, of what's mined in DRC is processed in China, so before it comes into the global supply chain. So everyone is worried about aligning and having proper consolidation in international relations and making sure that countries that have these resources are friends of those that need them. That has led to all those rivalries around, China, around, and also alignment where, the EU, for instance, is trying to make Africa a strategic partner because of some of these minerals, because Africa has about 4% of global supplies, global deposits of those. So there's that's really very critical. And the vulnerability is even heightened because one, the supply chain, but also because most of the technologies that the West, but many developed countries depend on for the future, are going to rely on these minerals. And if you have a need to expand access, but also you feel vulnerable, then there's a heightened conversations around the criticality and vulnerability of the supply chains. And so that's a risk factor that you can't take for granted. However, the challenge is that in many of these conversations, the focus is on geopolitics and the alignment and national level conversations rather than looking at the entire supply chains of the entire value chain of critical minerals. And so, as you would know, when you think about lithium, which Ghana is now developing, you think about cobalt, you think about rare earth elements, graphite, think about all those ones. Now, they have an entire value chain from the upstream where it is mined up to the point where they add value to refine and to the end user basically. So if you think about the electric vehicle and the battery systems that the Western countries need mostly, to get that mineral, you need to mine it. And so you cannot just think about aligning with government without also thinking about the micro level politics and the governance of that. And so when governments are beginning to think more about supply chains as a geopolitical conundrum, they miss the point about the subnational level conversations that can disrupt mining and that can also disrupt the supply chains. And so I look at justice as a supply chain factor, not just as a social factor, justice and equity, not just as a social factor as well. And so again, my starting point of supply chain conversations is a starting point of justice and equity where people in the upstream of mining feel a part of the mining process so that they don't feel a need to disrupt the mining process so that the supply chain globally can continue without much disruption. Unfortunately, the geopolitical conversations doesn't take these justice conversations seriously. And if you want to bring it home in terms of how that can be very disruptive, think about some protests that happened in Chile a few years ago, 2019 or so, in the Atacama regions, where the mining communities decided that they were not getting a fair share of the mining process, but also the miners themselves. So they decided to protest. And for a week of disruptive protests, the mining supply chains lost about $6 billion just for disruptions in a week. So the money is lost, but supply chains are disrupted as well. Think about that scenario where, every single mining community decides to stop mining from happening. That means that you are not just looking at a social problem at hand, but you're looking at an entire supply chain disruption. And that's what is missing in that conversation that I need to highlight. And that's why, for me, when you talk about social license as a factor in the supply chain, it means that, social license is basically a way of saying that in the mining process, mining communities are stakeholders because until they allow mining to happen in their community, you can't mine. And if you can't mine, it means you can't export. And if you can't export, you can't feed the global supply chains of critical minerals for the energy transitions. And every single part of that value chain is important. As much as refining, adding value to minerals is important, it's equally very important to make sure that you can actually mine. And to be able to mine, you need a social license from communities that live in the mining areas. Social license is not on paper, it's not a legal license issued to mining companies, but mining companies and governments know that without proper integration into the mining communities, they can't mine. But that's not taken seriously at a global level of supply chains. And that's where we need to begin to think about this. And I did some work in Ghana recently. In fact, 2 publications came out of that. And those are there, you can see on your screen, which looked at how supply chain conversations cannot go without looking at the upstream, which is where the mining happens. And so you have areas in the Ewoya community in Ghana. So Ghana recently just discovered lithium, not recent, about 3 or 4 years ago. It's taken a while to get it on stream in terms of to process into mining, but at least the legal framework has been consolidated now. Atlantic Lithium that found the mineral is now trying to offload to another company. That's another conversation. But the point there is that even as this mine has not come on stream, mining communities already feel left out of the mining process. And so there's a social license which young people are beginning to use. And so when there's the environmental impact assessment that a company needed to do with the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, young people decided to disrupt the process, even though eventually they allowed it to happen. But everyone got upset, got jittery a bit, wanting things to happen, and community members wanted to disrupt it. Eventually it happened, but that's the kind of power they wield. Still, community members feel, yes, my time is almost up, I guess.
Yeah, we have to wrap up. Your time is
Yes.
up, so let's wrap up.
Yeah, that's fine. So I guess the point there is that to think about supply chains, not only in terms of the grand macro level conversations, but as a justice and equity conversation to be had in communities. And so I guess I can end on this slide to say, whilst it's important to have strategic cooperations, build alliances, and diversify supply, sources of energy, minerals for the energy transitions at the industrial policy level, and to have access to minerals to supply to the energy transitions, you also need a certain degree of legitimacy and durability in the way mining is done. It means you have to have sustainable mining in place. You need to make sure people are happy and that you can let your mining happen in peace and safely to feed the chains of the energy transitions. And I guess that's gonna be it for me. Hopefully, I've stopped sharing my screen. and that if there are any questions or follow-up issues, I could attend to them. Thank you.
Welcome, welcome. Definitely we're going to allow for some questions once Dr. Capel is also done as well. And so please, thank you so much, Dr. Clement, for that insightful keynote. We're quickly going to go to our next keynote speaker. And so I'll read his profile briefly and then he takes over as well. Fortunately, time is not on our side to be doing so much. So we're just going to be doing it according to the time so that we can finish up right here. Thank you so much. Our next keynote speaker is Dr. Kapil Narula, who is a senior analyst at the Climate Champions team, where he led breakthrough agenda for catalyzing international cooperation to accelerate climate action. He has over 2 decades of versatile work experience in international organizations, government, think tank, and universities. He works on clean energy transition, climate change, and maritime sustainability. He is the author and editor of 7 books and more than 100 articles. He has earlier worked as Economic Affairs Officer at the United Nations, advisor energy at NITI, lecturer at the University of Geneva, and in the government of India. He holds an interdisciplinary PhD degree in energy, environment, and climate change, master's degree in engineering, and has a certification in sustainability and climate risk. He is a member of the expert group on UN Task Force on Clean Energy Transition Minerals, and also a member of the ACCET International Advisory Board. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Dr. Kapil Narula.
Very elaborate presentation about me, and good morning, everyone. I would first like to congratulate Dr. Isaac and his team for a wonderful initiative and starting on this important journey. Let me start by saying that for a century, the world has asked one question about Africa's minerals. How much can we extract? Today, I want to ask a different one. How much can we keep? Africa's mineral wealth has been extracted for several centuries, and the next chapter has to be about value. Let's look at the scale of what we are discussing and the gap sitting inside it, because numbers are unambiguous. Africa holds roughly 30% of the world's critical mineral reserves: cobalt, lithium, graphite, rare earths, platinum group metals, copper, manganese, nickel. Yet, the continent captures only a fraction of the value those reserves generate. Look at cobalt. The DRC supplies about 84% of the world's output, but captures just 3% of the global battery and electric car value chain. The ore leaves, but the value doesn't arrive. Look at platinum. South Africa mines 3/4 of the world's output, but refines almost none of it. The metal that anchors clean technology catalysts leaves the continent in raw form. Look at lithium. Zimbabwe exports raw lithium concentrate, which captures only 5 to 10% of a battery's eventual value. The midstream chemical processing step, the part that actually turns rock into battery-grade material, captures 20 to 40% of the value add. That step happens almost entirely somewhere else. Therefore, this is not a resource problem. Africa was never short of resources. This is a strategic gap, and strategy is a choice. Coming to the next slide, I would say, so what closes this strategic gap? At ACCET, we organize the answer across around 4 pillars, and I want to walk through each one. First is governance. Value addition has to be built on how mineral rights, contracts, and revenues are governed from the start. Transparent, accountable frameworks that make sure that a fair share of value stays on the continent, and that gives investors the predictability they need. Step 2 is financing. Refineries, battery-grade processing plants, and clean energy infrastructure are capital intensive, and African economies cannot carry that risk alone. we need blended and innovative finance, instruments that bring in patient capital and de-risk beneficiation projects so that they actually get built on ground. Third step is technology. This is where the shift from extraction to value addition physically happens. In processing plants, in component manufacturing, in the skills and research base that let African engineers and firms own more of the technology. And fourth is partnerships and people. Value addition has to be inclusive of communities and workers and backed by diplomacy that lets Africa negotiate as an equal partner in these global supply chains, not simply as a price taker. Next slide, please. Let me close with this. By the next generation, no one will remember Africa's critical mineral moment for the tons of ore extracted. They will remember 5 choices this generation made. First is governance over drift. Did we build transparent, accountable systems or let the old opaque deal-making continue? Second is funding over dependency. Did we mobilize patient blended capital to build our own processing capacity or stay dependent on whoever would buy the raw ore? Third is technology over raw exports. Did we own the refining, the components, the skills, or just the hole in the ground? Fourth is equity over extraction. Did communities, workers, and the environment genuinely share in the benefit, or were they an afterthought? And partnerships over price taking. Did we negotiate as equals in these global supply chains or accepted whatever terms we were offered? None of these work in isolation. That's precisely why an institution like ACCET exists, to connect them. So my closing ask to everyone in this room, policymakers, investors, private sector leaders, researchers, isn't to agree with me. It's to help make the right choices. That's the work ACCET exists to convene, and it's the work this dialogue starts today. Thank you, and I look forward to the conversations ahead.
Welcome, Dr. Kapil. That was a very brief yet very informative and insightful keynote presentation. Thank you so much. So we have had our 2 keynote speakers giving us a very insightful presentations. Now we're definitely going to move, because of time, we're going to push all Q&As to the end of this session, to the end of the entire conversation, so that we take the questions together and they'll be addressed to the various speakers accordingly. And so at this point, we're going to move to our panel discussion. And I'm excited to introduce our moderator for the day, who will be leading this panel discussion this very moment. She goes by the name Antoinette Manyaga. She actually is a member of ACCET's International Advisory Board, and so we are very happy and very proud to have her moderate this session. If you would permit me, Antoinette is an independent researcher and critical mineral specialist with expertise in responsible mining, mineral governance, and sustainable resource development. Her work focuses on supporting African policymakers, particularly in Cameroon, to strengthen governance frameworks, address illegal mining, and improve investment readiness across the mining sector. With a background spanning environmental science, technology, health, and public policy, Antoinette is committed to advancing transparent, socially responsible, and sustainable mineral development. Her interests include ESG, stakeholder engagement, policy communication, and the role of critical minerals in the global energy transition. She brings valuable insight into Cameroon's mineral landscape and advocates for practical, development-oriented approaches that promote responsible resource governance and inclusive economic transformation. Participants, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are, I want us to welcome our moderator for our panel discussion, Antoinette Manyaga.
Thank you all. Thank you, Gifty, for the introduction. I'm very pleased to be here. So, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. For the sake of time, we are going to move as fast as we could. So, today we are welcome to our panel discussion on financing Africa, critical minerals, and energy transition from ambition to investment. So we already had our keynote speaker who gave us a great picture of what is happening on the ground now in African country. So now we know that across the continent, there's a growing consensus that Africa critical mineral present an unprecedented opportunity to drive industrialization, strengthen energy security, and support sustainable development. Now, yet unlocking this potential requires more than geological resource. It requires investment policies, innovative financing model, and strong partnership. So today, to help us unpack this issue, I'm delighted to be joined by two distinguished experts with extensive experience across policy, finances, investment, and sustainable development. And so right now, I will address to my guests. I will start with Dr. Fikayo. So please, may I invite you to begin with your opening reflection? Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Yes, I'll be very brief. I think most of my reflections focus on the conversation around capacity, and the ways that we can go from ambition to investment. So if you go to the next slide. So I think I think you've gone too far. I think a big problem we're facing right now is there's actually, at least from a sort of data standpoint, there's a lot of money from people ready to invest on the continent. There's actually people who are eager to put money down because capital moves quickly when there's a sort of risk return profile. And I think one of the problems in the African context is that a lot of the investment we're seeing, a lot of the African mineral projects we're looking at are structured more as extraction assets and not industrial assets, right? So the focus is on how do we extract the minerals? How do we dig up the resources? There's no sense of what is the, long-term industrial policy here. And what people often forget is that financing follows structure. And so we need to sort of, and I think this ties into some of the previous comments that I think Dr. Clement made around how do we structure the mineral sector. How do we structure all of these conversations in a way that Africa is the industrial power behind it, as opposed to just a recipient of investment? The next slide, please. So I would the next slide, please. So slide 3, yeah, page 3. All right, cool. So the main three things that I always put forward as the binding constraints in the African context are coordination capacity, which is the fact that if you're going to invest in a mine, for example, to invest successfully in a mine and have the government and the people of the country benefit from that mine, you need the ability to coordinate different ministries, different people, different businesses, different sectors, you need the power sector, you need the transport sector, you need water, you need skills, you need the customs bureau. You need all of these people to work together. And I think oftentimes in an African context, we lack that coordination capacity. There's also the contract instability of it, where it's basically, everybody's afraid to invest because you don't know, if a new president comes to power, what's going to happen, right? Like you also sort of have to think about that. And there's, I think, what is often least addressed, which is this missing offtake, right? There was a conversation about, oh, let's build wind power in a country. And it's like, yeah, let's build wind power, but can the people in the country afford to buy your wind power when you've installed it, right? So just sort of thinking about that. Slide 4. So I sort of map out what a quality investment would look like. It would basically mean us sort of moving from a volume logic, or sort of having a volume logic and a quality logic. So instead of just announcing a deal or focusing on a deal to extract raw materials by a Chinese company, it's actually, what is the Chinese company going to do to maintain, or what is the government going to do in conjunction with the Chinese partner or whoever to build onshore, right? How do we move to building local processing capacity? How do we provide transferable skills? How do we build in fiscal terms that will survive, you know, a price cycle? How do we really start to think about long-term contracts in such a way that, you know, there's long-term quality built in? Slide 5, please. And I think there's potential. Can you go down, please? So I think yeah, great. So there are three things. There are three things that I think there's opportunity for Africa, that Africa has opportunity with. One is aggregating demand regionally. I think one of the things that we're not talking enough about is the AFCFTA. I think there's a conversation African countries need to have about us uniting. You know, the EU is able to achieve what the EU is able to achieve because it's 26 or 27 countries working together. And there is a world where if Africa wants to negotiate, you know, as a superpower internationally, we're going to have to work together. Right? Like we have to. I hate to be blunt, but Togo cannot negotiate with China. Like you're not equal. And even Nigeria, you know, I'm a Nigerian. Nigeria cannot negotiate by itself with China. That is a fact. You're not equal. Whereas if the entire sort of, I don't know, ECOWAS or SADC or the East Africa bloc, if we negotiated as a bloc, as a big group, they can't take us for granted, right? So that's something I always want to push. There's a conversation about the role of public capital, and we need to make fiscal terms boring. Stop trying to announce fancy financing programs. Choose the simplest possible thing. And the last slide, the point I want to leave with, so if we remember nothing else, I'm of the opinion that our main problem on Africa is not necessarily a financing gap. It is a project design gap where we're not quite designing projects in a way that are long-term sustainable and beneficial to us. So I hope that was quick enough. I'm happy for the organizers to send that round if that's something people would want, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Fikayo. Now, Mrs. Hera, would you mind, may I invite you to begin also with your opening reflection about this interesting subject? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Antoinette. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we do.
All right. So I'm going to walk you through talk through my remarks. I haven't prepared PowerPoint, but I'm happy to circulate them later on if needed or if the audience wants it. So yeah, thank you so much, Antoinette, and I will try not to repeat the excellent ground that has already been covered, but I'm going to try to reframe the whole topic as where from what it is that we're actually financing. So as a way of quick introduction, I'm Hiram Podo, founder of Stratmine Advisory. I spent about 15 years within the industry, the commodities industry / mining industry as a whole, as a corporate strategist, doing, you know, all sort of forecasting, looking at market intelligence within mining majors. And a little bit, I spent some time in the European energy as well. And today I mostly advise to Stratmine Advisory, governments and investors across the DRC, Cameroon, and the wider copper belt. And I also publish research on African mineral value chains. So I look at this subject of financing as a practitioner does, whether, you know, it's a deals that either closes or don't. I also look at the supply side and demand side as well, because this is the part of the value chain that as a continent we don't always get to see, because we tend to be more focused on the supply side as, you know, an exporter of raw minerals. And actually, as you move towards the value chain, this is where most of the value is actually captured. So let's start with what the energy transition actually is, because I think we often finance the wrong picture of it. So for centuries, the world has run on an energy system that you have to keep feeding. So whether it's fossil fuels such as coal, oil, gas, so you burn it and then you buy more. So when we talk about energy transitions, it replaces it with an energy system that you build once and then you run on either sunlight or wind. So that means the energy transition is not primarily a fuel story, but it's a material story. So you stop paying for the fuel and you pay upfront for the machine. And that machine is made of copper, lithium, cobalt, nickel, manganese, you name it. So an electric vehicles, for example, will need about 6 times the mineral inputs of a conventional car that we drive today. So lithium demand for electric vehicles is set to triple by 2040. And batteries already absorb close to 9/10 of the world's lithium production. So this is the largest rematerialization of the global economy in a century. So that is why African cannot be a guest at this conversation. Africa is actually the ground this conversation should stand on. As you know, Dr. Kapil mentioned earlier, roughly 70% of the world's mined cobalt come from the DRC. And around 80% of platinum comes from Southern Africa, same as the manganese, which is over 50%. So we do have graphite, lithium from Zimbabwe to Nigeria, bauxite from Guinea, from Cameroon. And yet the African continent hosts less than 1% of the world's battery manufacturing capacity and attracts barely 2 to 3% of global energy investment. So where does the value actually live? If you take lithium, for example, if you look at the economic of the value chain for lithium, you have to go from the ore to the concentrate, then you make the sulfates. And then further down the chain, you make battery-grade hydroxide, and then the cathode, and then the cells. So if you think about Nigeria, about 3 weeks ago, they inaugurated the largest lithium plant in Nasarawa, which is about $250 million investment, which is a great milestone, which we salute. But if you look closely at the value chain, it produces only lithium sulfate, which is an intermediate product. Remember, from the concentrate, you go to sulfate, and then which is only the second rung within the value chain. So you look at the spodumene concentrates, they trade today at around $2,500 a ton. Battery grade carbonate, which is just above the sulfate, so which is rank 3, is about roughly about $20,000. So the conversation spread between those two numbers, which is where the margin lives. And that step, which is chemical refining, is roughly 70% controlled by China. So, and above it, you still have the cathode and the cell, and the value keeps multiplying. So Africa has climbed from the first node of a 5 node ladder to the second. So the wealth lives upstairs, and this is where we need to see how we capture that value. So we look at what's happening now in some African mining countries, such as Zimbabwe and Namibia. They have responded with export restrictions. But some of my research, or some of the research that we've been doing, find out that instinct might be right, but it's incomplete, because an export ban relocates the factory, but yet it does not by itself create African capability. So whether it's in Zimbabwe or Nigeria, the plants being built to comply with sovereignty laws, they are financed and owned by the same foreign capital those laws were meant to reduce dependence on. So the value that is created on our soil is not yet the value captured by our economy. So we really need to keep that in mind, that the value you create is not necessarily the value that you capture, because we have internal mechanism of transfer pricing, etc., which still move the capital outside of our host countries. So which brings me to the topic of this panel, which is financing. And I will put 3 propositions on the table for our discussion. So first, the money. As we discussed the value chain earlier, it must follow the ladder, not just the mine. So we are good at financing the hole in the ground, which is the exploration, the extraction side of things. But the gap is everything between the mine and the battery, which is the final product. So we need to look more into refining and also the ecosystem around the mines, whether it's power. You need to power a mine, investing in the mining projects is also investing in the infrastructure that's going to make the mine work, whether it's power, corridors to transport the materials, and as well as the skill sets. Secondly, the midstream only becomes bankable at a regional scales. As Dr. Fikayo mentioned earlier, there is no single national market that can justify a refinery plant. But if you pull those needs together, you're mostly able to sort of build a plant that is going to aggregate materials from different countries. For example, the lithium cathode would need cobalt from the DRC, copper from Zambia, lithium from Nigeria, etc. And thirdly, some of the capital must also be ours, not only, foreign capital. If you look at African pension funds, for example, they hold roughly $450 billion, and almost none of it touches the mining sectors, probably less than 2% or something around that number. So yet we've seen, recent examples such as Cameroon, for example, where they were able to syndicate 5 banks for a local, to finance a local mining operator. So which shows us that it can be done with local capital. So the question of this, decade is no longer whether Africa transform its minerals, because we've already sort of started. But the question is how far up the ladder, how far up the value chain we can go, and who is going to own it, and how is it going to be financed. So I leave it at it for now. And over to you, Antoinette. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shira. Wow. So while you was talking, I was taking notes and I was just nodding because exactly you raise key challenge that maybe our government haven't thought about yet, like kind of unify the strength, making sure that they don't go alone negotiating with those giant those Western country. So without wasting our time, I will start with the first question addressed to you and to Dr. Fikayo. So we know that Africa possesses many of the minerals essentially for the global energy transition, yet investment has not translated into broad-based industrial transformation. So why do you think this gap still exists? So open to you.
Yeah. Should I go first?
Yes, please do.
So I believe the main reason why the investment hasn't translated into industrial transformation is because we have financed mostly the extraction side of things, which is bankable on its own, but we haven't been really financing the transformation side. A mine can typically raise capital, against an ore body and an offtake, but a refinery cannot raise capital if there is no firm, power or corridor or chemical inputs, or even the right skills and a buyer that's already there, to offtake the materials. So none of which a single project and also a single country can supply. So the money actually stops where the value addition will start. So if you look at the numbers, a continent with a fifth of humanity attracts 2 to 3% only of global energy investment. And actually, if you look at the investment for critical minerals, it actually fell by 9% last year. So with lithium, only spending down 40%, and even where you have processing, the structure, where the same group owns the mine, the same group owns the plant, the offtake, the margin is still being captured internally, and it doesn't travel up the ownership chain. So, and the majority is due to internal transfer pricing processes. So the gap persists, in my opinion, because transformation needs coordinated capital, build a plant, but build the power and the corridor around it. And also we need to be able to build audit capacity so that our host countries can really track the flows, where the flows are. So we've been good at financing the mines, the upstream side of things, but very bad at financing everything in between. The whole and the end markets, the battery market, for example.
Thank you, Era. Dr. Fikayo, if you have.
Yeah, I would definitely echo the same. I also think there's a skills gap, right? Like there's a technology gap as well, because you invest in all these things, you know. So for example, in Nigeria, the government is trying to encourage solar panel production within the country. The question is, do we have the people who can do that skills wise? Do we have the technology to do that, right? So I do think there's a gap in that as well. So I would add that to it.
Oh, thank you. So we move to the question 2. According to your own opinion, should Africa now shift the conversation from attracting more investment to attracting better investment? So what should quality investment look like? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to take this. I feel like it literally was on page 4 of the slides I shared, right? I think quality investment is moving from just having all these deals that you're announcing to moving to having value retained on shore, right? It's actively investing, focusing on investments, focusing on financing that keeps local processing capacity, that builds local processing capacity. You know, you want a world where when you're negotiating the deal, when you're negotiating financing, you are asking yourself, how do I maximize value out of this, right? So I'm always wary of the difference between more and better, because you know that's what is more and what is better can vary. But I do think there's a deeper conversation that needs to be had about when you're negotiating financing, when you're asking for money, when you're negotiating these contracts. What is the conversation that's going into making sure that it's long-term sustainable? What is the conversation that is going on to ask that you're building long-term capacity, you're building long-term sustainability into the project, right? Because again, I use Nigeria as an example. One of the things that's happening now, for those who might be aware, is Mission 300, right? Which is a World Bank project to provide solar power or at least to provide power for 300 million Africans, hence the name Mission 300. And one of the problems Mission 300 is going to have in the next 5 years is you're going around building all these solar farms in remote parts of Africa. The people you're building it for don't necessarily know how to maintain it, right? So, you know, it's more financing, it's better financing, but it's also not long-term strategic thinking, right? So I think the short answer to this, so I don't ramble, is I do think we need better contracts and better strategic thinking. That I think is what we need.
Thank you. Era, anything to add?
Yeah, sure. I actually completely agree with Dr. Fikayo about the strategic thinking, because we also need to quantify that, what the better investment looks like. So I'll answer with the framework that we worked on at Stratmine, because quality needs a definition that you can score. So we call it the capture that index, and it asks 6 questions for any investment. So first of all, how deep in the value chain does it go? Is it at the concentrate level, the cathode level? Who actually owns the asset and who controls the offtake? And is there one related party buyer, or is there a market for it? Fourth, does the host state have the audit capacity to verify, intra-group transfer pricing? So we see how the money flows between, business entities. Also, we need to look at, the power and the infrastructure. Are they solved already, or are they assumed within a project? Is the policy, the country's policy actually calibrated to the country's real capacity, and what technology and skills will be left behind once the investor leaves? So quality investment to us actually scores well on those 6. And the interesting finding from that index is that the loudest the sovereignty rhetoric, the lowest actually is that the lowest the capture is oftentimes. So because a foreign owned plant built, in a hurry to comply with the ban, for example, it ticks the flags, but it fails 5 of those 6 elements. So the counterexample, for example, will be Botswana, where the latest renegotiated agreements with De Beers took the state's shares of diamonds from diamond sales from 30% towards 50% approximately, but it took decades of patiently building local capabilities. So they were able to negotiate that increase in terms of shares because it has taken time. So that is what, to me, better investment look like. It measures by what remains, not by what necessarily arrives. So that's my take on that.
Thank you, ladies. So the third question will be addressed to Dr. Fikayo. So Dr. Fikayo, you have worked extensively on resource governance and policy. So for you, what policy reforms are most urgently needed in African country? If African country want to attract investment into mineral processing, manufacturing, and higher value industry rather than remaining exporter of raw material. Thank you.
So this might be a controversial take, but I do think African countries need to stop looking for investment, because every time you go looking for investment and you collect somebody's money, you're at the mercy of whatever they want, right? I'm of the opinion that African countries need to start looking inwards for that investment. That might be a controversial opinion, but I just think at some point, if you keep asking outsiders for money, you can't keep complaining that he who pays the piper calls the tune. I think the question African countries need to start asking ourselves is, the money we have now, what can we do with it? Right? Like, how do we, I use Nigeria as an example just because Nigeria is where my research sits, but I'm sure, there's room for generalization here. But, Nigeria has received a ton of money from foreign investors. Nigeria has a ton of domestic capacity with the DMO and all of these institutions. What is a world where we actually take that money internally and we start to invest it in ourselves, right? Like you cannot keep, I tell people, sorry to sort of go off on a tangent here, but I don't know if you guys have followed the drama that happened in March when the World Bank came out with a report saying they now endorse industrial policy. For the longest time, the World Bank was discouraging, African countries and Latin American countries from using industrial policy. But now that America and the EU and the UK are using industrial policy, the World Bank says it's okay. Right? You know what country has been growing all this while on industrial policy? China. You know one advantage, in quotes, China had? China was not looking for their money like that. I hate to sound like my mom. I just think if you're going to keep going outside to ask for investment, you are leaving yourself at the mercy of whoever is giving you if I give you $10 million, you have to do what I say. That's just business, right? So that's my controversial opinion that I have said in public. I will stand by it. But to actually answer your question in the faith and in the good faith that you asked it, I do think as we're looking for investment, or if we're going to keep looking for investment, we need to structure the contracts in such a way that it is realistic about our existing capacities and the capacities we want to build. So, for example, I think a couple of years ago, I think it was Zambia announced a ban on the exporting of critical minerals, right? And the goal of the ban was to force local production. Now, on the face of it, that is a very good policy when you're thinking about investment. But the problem with that policy is, at the time, Zambia did not have the infrastructure for local production. So good policy, bad execution. So I think as the policy reform that is most needed is sort of again, I always come back to it. I think I've built my entire career around this, is the coordination capacity. How do we get all the state actors involved in the process aligned? How do we make sure we're building the technology we need? How do we make sure we're getting the right financing instruments, right? For example, do you need a results-based climate finance process? Or do you need an upfront type of loan? What do you need, right? So the policy reforms, I would say, to sort of get off this high horse that I've climbed, the policy reform that is most needed comes down to the technical sort of a focus on building technical capacity. It comes down to a focus on building alignment across state actors and a need for long-term strategic thinking. I feel like I keep saying that, but it is what you need.
Okay, Dr. Fikayo. So that leads us to the following question, which is addressed to ERA. So, ERA, increasingly investors are paying attention to ESG, performance, and community impact. So how can African government balance investor expectation with environmental protection, social inclusion, and local economy development?
Right. Thanks, Antoinette. That's actually a very good question. But I just want to reflect a bit on the word balance, because it sort of implies a trade-off, because it assumes that investors' expectations and local development will sit on the opposite sides of the scale. So in my experience, these are priced off the same variable, which is risk. So a project with genuine community buy-in and, for example, formalized artisanal supply and a credible, environment management is simply a lower risk project. And lower risk means cheaper capital. So, for example, if you look at the goal, issue in Cameroon, some of the work that we did there estimated that if we were to restore EITI, the EITI standing and beneficial ownership transparency, this could cut the country's risk premium by 100% to 200%, which is basically, the interest rate at which, you borrow money from abroad. So if we were to translate that into, actual money, that's about $10 billion on a single project pipeline. So this is about $50 to $100 million a year for the entire country. So governance / ESG as a whole is not a tax; it's actually a discount on your cost of capital. And also we also need to look at ESG as something that grants you market access with a price attached to it. So if you look at the battery regulation that's coming into force in 2027, so in a few months, from now. So it says every electric vehicle battery sold in Europe will need a digital passport tracing, all its minerals, and some of the carbon footprints declaration are already, phasing in. So if I go back to my experience with a major mining company, we actually calculated that decarbonizing mining operations, whether by injecting renewables or improving energy efficiency, it turned out to be more value creative rather than a cost. So the energy savings that you're able to do actually pay for the transition. And when we sort of stress tested walking the commitment back, the analysis shows that the reputational and commercial damage will far outweigh any savings that we would have done by then, because the end buyers, which was luxury brands in that case, and in the case of batteries will be car manufacturers, they had built their own positioning on those commitments. So the market now pays a premium on verified, climate performance, ESG standards. And an African unit of cobalt or an aluminium plant, which is produced on hydro or solar power, can be actually advantage in that world. So we also we also need to look at the case of artisanal mining, where the whole compliance thing should meet reality. So, for example, taking the example of Cameroon again, we have the official gold exports in the custom data that states about 22 kilograms. And then you look at the mirror statistics that shows over 15 tons. So this is a gap that represents about, 65 billion francs CFA a year in lost fiscal value. So you cannot audit that away by excluding artisanal miners. So in Cameroon alone, between 40,000 and 100,000 Cameroonians live on it. They depend on artisanal mining. So if you formalize it, you can finance it. If you're able to trace it as source, you're also able to capture more premium from that sort of traceable brand that you would have built, like ESG compliant brand that you would have built. So this to me is mostly alignment, not necessarily balance, but it's mostly alignment to what the demand today looks like. So putting ESG, implementing ESG is not a tax; it's actually value capture for host countries.
Thank you, Era. My take is ESG grants you access to the market, and which is really interesting because here in Cameroon, when governments try to limit China malign influence, we keep asking them to pay huge amounts of money regarding ask for environmental bond. So we move to the next question. So one concern frequently raised is that Africa export minerals while importing finished product. So what financing mechanism could realistically support regional value chain and local beneficiation across the continent? I think that since you talk about financing, Era should go first. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So let's move into the actual mechanisms. If as we mentioned earlier, single country, beneficiation usually will fail on scale. So the mechanisms that work are the ones that pull scale across borders. First, cross-border special economic zones with anchored finance. For example, the DRC and Zambia battery initiatives on their Afrexim Bank. You have Kinshasa that approved the Musompo zone back in February with over $200 million and targeting $2 billion in private investment. So I read somewhere an article on Bloomberg saying that a DRC plan would cost about a third of its US equivalent. So the economics of scales are actually real here. And what's missing is the actual vehicle to aggregate those. So I'll go further as saying the continent's complementarity is actually the asset. So if you look at a lithium cathode, you will need cobalt from Congo, manganese from Zambia, refined lithium from Nigeria, for example. No African country has all of it, but the continent has all of it. So second, the corridor finance should be treated as mineral finance. So you have, for example, the Lobito, which is moving copper to the Atlantic today, but the Zambian branch, which is about 4 billion euros, is still unfinanced. So a corridor will be the balance sheet of a regional, a balance sheet a regional plan will borrow against. So you also need to look at at financing the ecosystem rather than the assets on its own, making sure that you can actually move the material, outside of the country, that you have proper infrastructures, power, logistics, and everything within that ecosystem. And also, we also need to think about the credit committees that actually grant financing to our countries. For example, a pension funds credit committee will look at a refinery in the copper belt, and they aren't asking if it's a good project. They're asking how much they can lose if they invest in it. So if, for example, you have a structure where a development bank will take the first 20 cents of the financing instrument, and then maybe commercial bank will come after. So the answers will change, the risk rating changes, and a deal that would have failed the committee last year can actually close the following year. So that's how we can actually de-risk some of the investments that we have on the continent by structuring, that better. So I think that's my take on what some of these financing mechanism can be put in place to finance in a better way. And also, we need our, as I said earlier, we need our own capitals, from our African pension funds. There is only about 2 to 3% that they invest in infrastructure in the mining sector. They can do more. And we have shown that, there is possibility to use local capital for it. So we can definitely, start banking regionally where we cannot bank nationally. So integration is definitely how, some of those numbers can close.
Thank you, Hera. So our timekeeper is flagging us that the time is fast spent. So we will stop there and we go to Q&A for those who have questions. We are welcome. We are going to take up to 3 questions. So if anyone has a question, please send it to the chat, and our guest here will try to give you an answer. So thank you.
So Antoinette, we already have some questions in our Q&A box. You can check them out quickly. We have about 4 to 5 questions in our Q&A. You're muted.
Yeah.
Can you?
Okay, thank you. So I'll go with the first question from Bedu Sanda. Sorry if I'm misspelling your name. So, good afternoon. My name is Christian Sanda, engineer in economics and management of mine and hydrocarbon, previously the head of mining process. So I would like to ask you a question to our distinguished panelists. Many international institutions encourage responsible mining in Africa. However, shouldn't the conversation evolve from responsible extraction to responsible industrialization? Are we setting the bar too low for Africa? The second question will be, is Africa truly negotiating partnership, or are we still negotiating dependency under a different name? So this question is for Hera. The first question was addressed to Dr. Kapil, but I don't know if anyone can take it. But the second question is for Hera, and it's about a partnership negotiation. So Hera, if you can answer this, thank you.
You please rephrase the question on partnership negotiation, please?
So the question is Africa truly negotiating partnerships, or are we still negotiating dependency under a different name?
Yeah. Yes, thanks for the question. I think it goes back to, what we discussed earlier about, the rank within the value chain where we want to be in. And I took the example of, lithium processing plants in Nigeria, for example. So we've seen that, processing lithium cathodes takes several steps. And then we have, extractions happening that has been negotiated. And then we also, and the country also inaugurated the a processing plant about 3 weeks back, where they're going to be making lithium sulfate, for example. But this is only node 2 of transforming lithium into battery. There are still 5 nodes, of the value chain. So it's definitely a partnership that we should salute, but there is still more that can be done. So we are negotiating. There is it's a partnership that has been negotiated, but then there is still some dependency for as long as we don't really invest of the value chain. So it's a mix. So I think this is definitely the direction within which Africa should be traveling. I'm taking the example of Nigeria, but if you look at the DRC, that would be the same, for example. So they manufacture, they've actually banned the export of copper concentrate. And they actually manage company to make cathodes within the country, but it's still not enough because, for example, the country is not able to manufacture copper cables, for example. So the partnerships, are there, but we need to really look at the partnerships that will actually move us up the value chain, because this is where the value is. Because if you take the copper concentrates, for example, and you pay a few $100s for the concentrate, but the final cathode costs as much as $30,000 per ton. That's a huge difference between the raw product and the finished product. And above that, there is still more. There is cable, etc. So we really need to look at the partnerships that we can make that involve more transformation. I hope that answered the questions.
Thank you, Hera. Definitely it answers the question. So I will go for the second question from Boubacar S. He's an ACCET research fellow, and the question is addressed to Dr. Clément Sefa. Dr. Kapil has left earlier, so Dr. Clément Sefa will take the question. Here is the question. What concrete policy and investment mechanism are needed for African government to capture a greater share of the economic value generated by critical mineral while still maintaining a competitive environment for private sector investment? So I'll go again. So
Yes, okay, thank you. I think this way. Yes, I mean, good questions there, and thanks, Hera and Antoinette, but also the other person who left, for those very insightful discussions. And so most of that, I think you've touched on. In terms of what concrete policies and investment mechanisms are needed, I guess for me, it's good to reframe the whole question of what kind of economy we need. I mean, the current approach to investment and equity is all about getting some fairness for workers, getting some fairness for communities. But still, like have we raised the discussions, but still maintaining the status quo that really undermines the global South countries upstream the supply chain. And so if you ask questions about what can be done, I guess we need to rethink the entire structural foundations upon which mining is built, which feeds critical minerals to the global supply chain. Questions we need to be asking. We need to have policies around how mining can be valued at the right price, considering all the costs involved, for instance. And so most of the time, people think, oh, mining is profitable, but it's not. If you consider the cost to the environment, water bodies destroyed, forests destroyed, land degraded, people's livelihoods lost forever. No one ever quantifies this as they should be. And as a testament to this, you see that when mining is done, you go to old mining sites, and the whole community is a ghost community. The land is gone. You need money to reclaim the land. There's never any investment to do that. That tells you how disruptive mining itself is. I'm not saying we shouldn't do mining. Mining is absolutely necessary for the kind of investment we have. So if you are thinking about what investment mechanisms are needed, we need mechanisms that can quantify mining as it should be for the cost to be passed on to the end user, who are the investors, the EV drivers, the solar panel users, so that we are not just absorbing the cost. People upstream are absorbing the cost for end users to use, which is ridiculous. I mean, if you look at it in the bigger scheme of things. So that would be my one big thing I would say, that reframing, having a structural foundational shift around how mining is done, but also how capital gains from mining is computed and passed on to investors.
Thank you, Dr. Clement. So this is the last question. Sorry for those questions that were left unanswered because our panelists have another meeting and we are running out of time. So the last question is addressed to Dr. Isaac. Do you believe individual African countries can successfully compete in the global critical mineral market, or is regional cooperation through initiatives such as the African Continental Free Trade Area essential for building globally competitive value chain? So this is addressed to Dr. Isaac. Dr. Isaac, this is for
Can you
you.
repeat the question again, so that I
So,
can get?
okay, do you believe individual African country can successfully compete in the global critical minerals market, or is regional cooperation through initiatives such as the African Continental Free Trade Area
Yes.
essential for building
I get
globally
a question now. I
Okay.
think this has been already discussed, and I think Dr. Fikayo talked about it very extensively. I think Dr. Clement too made a few related points there. And I don't believe that if we negotiate alone as a country, we can make any meaningful, headway. It's not possible. That's the way I see it, and that's the way I believe. So we can leverage on this after continental free trade area to do it. There's an adage in our local language that it's always best to go in a broom. So they use broom to, make the point that one broom can break, but several brooms put together cannot break. There's an African adage, but I'm taking the key from it, and I want to say that yes, simple and short, it's not possible that we can negotiate effectively as individual countries. We need to come together and with the end. Unfortunately, that has been where I'm saying. I know maybe things can change, but I've been seeing that most of the countries are going in alone and talking about how they believe they want a particular minerals for themselves and how they can negotiate in a single way. But I don't believe so. We need to negotiate together and we need to leverage on these blocks and do so. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Isaac. So, thank you, Era. Thank you, Dr. Clement and Dr. Fiaco were left earlier. So, I will turn the mic to Gifty for the rest of this session. So, it has been a pleasure for me to moderate. And then I hope that one of the question was, Dr. Isaac, if the presentation, if the recorded session will be shared or the presentation could be shared with those who participate so that we could have at least something, a material they can look on after this dialogue. So Gifty, thank you. Over.
Antoinette, thank you so much. That was a very, very, very beautiful moderation right there. And I mean, we had our speakers really giving us so many answers and insights. At this point, I would want our speakers to give us probably their, closing remarks. I mean, we'll take closing remarks from Dr. Clement. We'll take one from Hera, of course. I'll also take some final words from our executive director himself. And so I'll start with you, Dr. Clement.
Yeah. I mean, as you can see, some kids are just stressing my life at the background because they are on holidays. So, pardon me. My final thoughts will be around you know, I mean, first of all, I'm supply chain enthusiast. So anything that feeds into energy transitions, those minerals are important. But I guess the conversation now has also been significantly on value addition. And I think somebody made a point about shouldn't we shift the conversation from sustainable mining to value addition in terms of that. And I think they are all very important. And in fact, you can only have value, you can take value addition seriously if there will be sustainable supply to, you know, supply of the raw materials to the what you are adding value to, basically. So I don't think we should treat them as two separate worlds apart. It's an entire supply chain, value chain from extraction downstream to end user. So I think we need to keep that in mind in the conversation. The other thing that I thought is important to mention is that even as we emphasize investment in, you know, adding value, but also making sure we are just moving from extractive economies to industrial economies, let's also be mindful that any processing done to critical minerals has consequences. And you need to ask yourself, why has Europe allowed China to take a lead and is now trying to catch up? The main reason is that Europe, the West, has never been interested in mining or processing because it's dirty. And the West has been trying to move away from making their hands dirty to being down the stream, being supplied with the processed materials. If we want to get into that mid level of both the mining and adding value, that's very possible. But we should be mindful that China is the only country that has been able to absorb the pain of the environmental cost, human cost, and it's perfecting it and making it better. Do we have the patience? Do we have the resources? Can we take the pain of that as we go? Of course, we should be able to think about how to do that better. But I guess the point is just to add to that conversation around industrialization, but the ESG consequences, environmental, social, and governance consequences of all that. But otherwise, look, I think I don't want to go on and on. Otherwise, I can speak for another hour. So I'll leave it here and wrap up. And thanks so much, ACCET, Isaac and Gifty for organizing this. Hera, Antoinette, it's been amazing. Very good to have you on the same panel. Yeah, hopefully we take further conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Clement. And so we're going to take final remarks from Hera. Hera.
Thanks, Gifty. So if I leave you with one idea is this. The energy transition is a materials transition. So the world is replacing the fuels that we burn with the machines that we build. And those machines are made of Africa's minerals. So that gives the continent its strongest negotiating position in the century. But this position is not a payoff. The value that will be captured in the midstream and financed at a regional scale and protected by our institutions that can also audit what happens inside, you know, the processing and refining plants that we attract on our soil. So we have already started climbing the ladder. But the question for the financiers and investment corporations is no longer whether Africa can transform its minerals, but how far up the ladder we can go, who is going to own it, and how is it going to be financed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hera. Wonderful, wonderful closing remarks. And then that brings me back again to Dr. Clement. You mentioned earlier you could talk for another hour. We're actually going to be hosting you for another conversation. I must say that this is just our inaugural conversation, and so the dialogue continues, and it's going to be one dialogue after the other because we're going to have conversations across board as far as critical minerals and energy transition is concerned. And so, Dr. Clement, please get ready for us. I'm going to personally send you an email. I'm going to be hosting you very soon on a very specialized, customized dialogue as well. And so please be ready for us. I'm going to take
That's
final.
all right.
You want to say something to that?
No, I'm just saying that's okay. I mean, it's always a pleasure to speak about minerals and energy transition. So it's not going to be a pain at all. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. And all our speakers, please get ready for us. Dr. Isaac, our executive director, will also give us his final remarks for the day.
Thank you very much, Gifty. Thanks to our speakers, our panelists, and everyone who has joined. We wish that we could have taken more time and answer all your questions. Of course, I saw the Q&A sections and a lot of questions there, which I think we could have, answered. But the point is that our panelists have other engagements too, and we can't keep them waiting and we can't go on. So that's what. To reiterate what Gifty said, these are just, our first in series. We're going to have several ones, and we believe that we are going to answer more of the questions and also bring light to whatever we want to discuss. And secondly, yes, I think there's one particular question that relates to whether we are going to make our materials available. Yes, of course, we are going to produce it. Put everything together and also share. So we will do much about it. Whilst we are in our mailbox, we will definitely let you know about these things. So thank you very much for everybody who has joined. And I strongly believe that discussion has reinforced, an important point. And basically, there were a lot that I took, but I realized that Africans role in the global energy transition must go beyond the extraction and, of export of critical minerals. The continent must now also build the capacity to value addition, the technology, investment, and policy decision. And most importantly, what Hera said about the fact that the energy transition is a materialistic one. It's not just a way of future, but it's a material. So these are some of the things that I'm taking away, and that's been a very good conversation for us. And for ACCET, as I said already, it's just the beginning, and we look forward to a sustaining one conversation and translating today's discussion to a more meaningful one. Finally, I would like to also take the opportunity and thank the ACCET team and also those who contributed to the success of the inaugural dialogue. And once again, we are open to partnership. I think that's something that I didn't stress on. This conversation can never be done alone. This journey that we want to take, the vision and the mission, it can never be done alone by ACCET. We know that there are meaningful people there. So anybody wants to partner with us, of course, we have our research fellows, we have international advisory body, and we have other people. So any organization which want to partner to advance the cause, we are ready to do that. Once again, thank you for your time, your insight, and the participation. We look forward to welcoming you to a nice discussion. Have a pleasant day. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Isaac Ankara. And just like he said, I want to say thank you for joining the inaugural Africa Critical Minerals and Energy Transition Dialogue convened by the Africa Center for Critical Minerals and Energy Transition. Like we said, this is the first of many conversations to come. And so keep your fingers crossed and then follow us on all social media platforms, the Africa Center for Critical Minerals and Energy Transition. The recorded version of this dialogue is going to be uploaded on our YouTube channel. Maybe a few days to come, maybe by next week, it should be up and running. And so you can revisit the conversation over and over again. And for those of you who are asking for the materials, we'll make sure that the materials, all the presentations, the documents are made available to all those who joined the webinar. Once again, my name is Gifty Boatma Anan. It's been a pleasure being your host for the day. Please do have a lovely, lovely day. Until we meet again, it's a goodbye for now. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Gifty. Bye-bye.
Bye.